You're listening to the MindPod Network. Friends, lovers, and listeners, you can always support this podcast by heading over to iTunes and leaving this podcast a review or just give it a rating. That's always a great way to support It's All Happening. And of course, you could go to zachleary.com and use the Amazon portal to buy all of your stuff. It's all happening. 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 It's all happening.
I don't know what I want. Well, when you don't know what you want, you've reached the state of desirelessness. When you really don't know. Because you see, there's a beginning stage of not knowing, and there's an ending stage of not knowing. In the beginning stage, you don't know what you want because you haven't thought about it, or you've only thought superficially. And then when somebody forces you to think about it and go through and say, yeah, I think I'd like this, I think I'd like that, I think I'd like the other, there's the middle stage. Then you get beyond that. Say, is that what I really want? In the end you say, no, I don't think that's it. I might be satisfied with it for a while, and I wouldn't turn my nose up at it. But it's not really what I want. Why don't you really know what you want? There's two reasons that you don't really know what you want. Number one, you have it. Number two, you don't know yourself, because you never can.
You never can, or maybe you can. We're going to find that out on this episode of It's All Happening with Zach Leary. That's me. I am your host. This is episode 132 of the show. Yes, it really is. And we have back to the program Dr. Dan Siegel, the author of the new book, Aware: The Science and Practice of Presence, a complete guide to the groundbreaking Wheel of Awareness meditation practice. Right, and in the interview, we're going to explore many of those themes that the great Alan Watts just spoke about in the intro. Knowing oneself, how to know oneself, and what it means to know oneself. What is it that you are knowing? What is the real self? What is the authentic self? What are the things that just get in the way from understanding, being aware, and learning about your real self? And Dan, Dr. Siegel, I should say, really breaks down not just a practice, a 25-minute meditation practice, but a whole new scientific and philosophical approach to unpacking the human experience into different elements that allows you to see the complete holistic view of the human experience, and in a way that I should say sort of like you're able to see the separate elements in a way that allows you to also understand how they all work together. It's not an exercise of separation or duality or anything like that. It's just a way of presenting, the human, the relationship between the mind and the body and the universe, and just a fantastic, fresh new approach. So we're going to talk about Dan more in a little bit, and of course his book. What are we going to talk about first? We're going to talk about the Green New Deal. By now you've heard of the Green New Deal. Let's talk a little bit about what it actually is. It's a pair of resolutions co-sponsored by somebody in the House and somebody in the Senate, respectively. In the House, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York, and Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts, both of them Democrats, of course, right? So reading from the Green New Deal website, I'm just going to read the opening paragraph. The Green New Deal will convert the old gray economy into a new sustainable economy that is environmentally sound, economically viable, and socially responsible. It seeks to solve the climate crisis by combining quick action to get net zero greenhouse gas emissions and 100% renewable energy by 2030, along with an economic bill of rights, the right to a single-payer healthcare, a guaranteed job at a living wage, affordable housing, and free college education. Now that's taken directly from the website, as I said, right? So I'm going to read a couple paragraphs from Fox News. The non-binding Green New Deal resolution supported by Socialist Representative AOC of New York and many fellow Democrats in Congress, including some running for president, makes absolutely no sense. It is a fantasy based on hopes and dreams with no basis in reality. There's never been a more economically destructive, job-killing, environmentally harmful, costly, and impractical proposal that has drawn so much support from members of Congress and White House hopefuls. Not only is the Green New Deal impossible to achieve, just trying to accomplish its absurd and harmful goals could send our nation into another Great Depression, throw millions of Americans out of work, and turn the American dream into a nightmare. And that was taken from the Fox News website and in a piece called Green New Deal Would Destroy American Dream, Create American Nightmare. The piece does go on to dissect it a little bit and kind of get into the weeds about some of the policies, but the reality of it is really based in fear and fear of change. So I think it's very, very useful to go back and look at our history if we truly want to understand the polarizing impact or the polarizing implications of the Green New Deal. Back in the 30s, there was this thing called the New Deal, which, of course, where the Green New Deal got its name from. The New Deal was a series of programs, public works projects, financial reforms. Within that came the invention of Social Security, lots and lots of regulations that were basically the flagship policy of FDR. The programs focused on what historians were to refer to as the 3 R's: relief for the unemployed and poor, recovery of the economy back to normal levels pre the Great Depression, and reform of the financial system to prevent another depression. So what's important to understand there is that the New Deal came on the heels of the Great Depression. The economic meltdown that was the Great Depression affected everyone in America, and because of that, everyone was looking for some form of change, no matter what your political ideology was, even radical change like the New Deal was. And it was radical. It was a complete reinvention of not just the structure of government, but also the ideals of what it meant to be American. For example, Social Security and all the implications, both real, tangible, and also philosophical that came from that. Of course, there was opposition to the New Deal, just like there was today for the Green New Deal, but there wasn't enough to prohibit it from getting passed. It's my perception that the New Deal, it was built off the fundamentals of American idealism, but it had inherent in it that the need to evolve American idealism to reflect the issues of the time was a very American thing to do. And for whatever reason, that is not coming through in the Green New Deal. What you hear a lot from people who oppose it is it will destroy the American way of life, right? So, you know, as long as the core American principles remained intact in the New Deal, the policy around it can evolve with the changing of the times. You know, people are calling AOC and everybody who is behind the Green New Deal as, they're calling them un-American, socialists, and all those sorts of things. And what I'm trying to understand, and I can't quite seem to understand, is what is it going to take for everyone, no matter race, class, political affiliation, income level, religious affiliation, anything like that, to understand that climate change is a real threat and we need to act on it, not just quickly, but also severely. Like, what is it going to take? Not only are we not addressing the problem with legislation or behavior in ways that are radical enough, the debate on whether or not it still exists is still at the top of the conversation. It's reminiscent of the 8 stages of grief. Is it 7 or 8? From denial and numbness to bargaining, depression, remorse, all the way to acceptance and mourning, empathy, and things like that. I mean, we are still in the early stages of this denial. So that is my question that I'm posing in this intro of the podcast. Let's do our homework on the Green New Deal. Let's see what it's really about here and put it in the context of American history. And I think make friends with the idea that it fits harmoniously into the unfolding of the American story, which has never been linear. It's always been full of fits and starts and radical changes. It's always been full of complete 180s that have to distance ourselves away from our early conveniences or trespasses and move into new ways of thinking. Okay, so there you have it. That was my rant on the Green New Deal. Sorry, it was extra long, this episode of the podcast, the intro. But let's get into the podcast with Dr. Dan Siegel, his new book, Aware, the Science and Practice of Presence, a complete guide to the groundbreaking wheel of awareness meditation practice. This was a really, really important podcast and just somewhat mind-blowing. It's not often during a podcast where there are moments of silence because after the guest says something, I'm just sitting there dumbfounded thinking about it and processing it. But that happened a couple times here. Joan Halifax describes this book as Dan Siegel has an extraordinary gift to describe patterns and make accessible in a powerful way the insights and practices that are fundamentals to well-being and awakening. Dan is an amazing mind, an amazing writer, an amazing communicator. The book is out everywhere, and enjoy the podcast. Get into it. Dr. Dan Siegel, welcome back to the podcast.
Zach, it's great to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And a return guest. I think you were in our first 20 episodes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming back.
An honor.
Well, I mean, you have this new book, The Science Aware, the Science of Practice of Presence. So many things I want to get into, but I want to start with the nature of the mind and why do you think it does what it does as it relates to cultivating more focus, practice, and presence in like the form of like actual practice, say meditation or something. But I almost think it's like a design flaw at times in the human condition that the mind is so active. It just never stops. Like we can stop our foot from moving, our hand, and we can't stop our heart from beating, but that constant monkey mind, that constant chatter, what is the nature of that?
Well, Zach, it's really interesting because the word mind, M-I-N-D, can be used in so many different ways. And so it's not like there's a right and a wrong way. So I think in our conversation right now, you and I should come to some shared understanding of what we mean by mind or what you mean by mind. So if I respond to your question when you're using the word mind, I know I'm saying something that is resonating with what you're asking about.
Well, I don't mean the brain in terms of like the physical structure of the brain. I mean sort of, I guess, the intangible quality of consciousness that I guess resides in the brain that we call the mind.
Yes, well, it's a great way we're starting, because that four-letter word, M-I-N-D, actually doesn't really have a formal definition anywhere. Even like the field of psychology, which is the ology is the study of psyche, would be a root for mind. So the study of the mind, there is no formal definition of mind in the field of psychology. In the field that I'm also trained in, which is psychiatry, that field also doesn't have a definition of the mind. So what I'll say here in response to your question is that we use a word like mind to infer something. Mm-hmm. So one thing you're saying is, oh, my mind was so busy, monkey mind. Right. So part of that is thoughts. So you can say, well, okay, fine. So the mind includes thoughts. But then you said something about consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then there's like consciousness.
That's something else entirely.
Which has awareness.
Yes.
And then is awareness itself thoughts, or is it you're aware of thoughts? So we'll get into all this in a moment. But for me, as a person working as a psychotherapist, therapist of the mind, trained in both psychological research, attachment research, and psychiatric treatment, I'm a psychiatrist, you have these aspects of mind treatment, mind study, mind therapy. So I went kind of out of my mind, if you will, to try to tease apart what is the mind. And so there's a long history about it. I think our first interview dealt with this.
I think it did, yeah.
So I'll just say this as we get into this, is that for me, as a professional and as a human being on the planet, nothing that I really heard about felt like it was getting deep to the underlying mechanism of mind that you're asking about. And so for me, this is not like I'm saying it's the right way, or it's certainly not the way other people do it. The mind was not just in your head, that it had to do with something called subjective experience, which would be like the felt texture of something. So we have this thing called first-person experience or subjective experience, which happens in a sense throughout your whole body, not just your head.
Yeah.
And then how do you know you're having this? Well, you have consciousness.
Right.
And then you can also have what's called information processing that isn't even in consciousness.
Right, okay.
So those three things.
That's subjective, right.
Subjective, consciousness, subjective experience, consciousness, and information processing are three aspects of the mind, if you will. And a fourth one that I've written about is called self-organization. And that's a long line of reasoning, but the bottom line is there's a regulatory process that comes from what are called complex systems.
Yeah.
Those are systems that are open to influences from outside of themselves, capable of being chaotic, and non-linear, which means a small input at an early time leads to a large and difficult to predict result. And so those non-linear, chaos-capable open systems are called complex systems. They have emergent properties, and emergent properties where the stuff of the system is interacting with itself and giving rise to something that is more than just the elements themselves. So what I proposed, over 25 years ago now, is that the mind is an emergent property of energy flow, so that subjective experience, perhaps consciousness, certainly information processing, emerge from energy flow, but that a fourth facet of mind, this self-organization, is, in mathematical terms, the fundamental emergent phenomena that is regulating how the self-organizing complex system unfolds over time. So I think the mind is those four facets that are likely all emergent properties of energy and information flow.
Okay, that is an amazing description, and that sounds like it's a complicated algorithm in the sense that what one experiences as a result of those four pillars all working together is, our how we view reality, our emotional intelligence, our emotional stability, perhaps our cognitive functions,
yes,
all of those types of things, right? So, especially doing the work that you've done, working with patients specifically, you've seen all so many aspects of different types of people. Why is it so, like, there are so many variables, and they're just, it feels like there are just so many possibilities for how those four pillars can create a reality for someone that seems like kind of hard to regulate.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, complex systems are continually unfolding.
Okay.
So they're verbs, they're not nouns.
Okay.
And if you say that the mind is some aspect of a complex system, these four aspects I wrote in a book called Mind, I think, are emerging from energy flow, then it's going to have a nearly, if not fully, infinite variety of unfoldings, not just across people like you versus me in quotes, but actually within your own experience. Now, you can get trapped in ways we'll talk about very soon into these schema or consciousness of, filters of consciousness that constrain how those energy patterns unfold. And so those learned filters of consciousness can actually become prisons for us. And so...
Oh, okay. What's an example of one of those prisons?
A narrative that says, I'm a loser. Or a narrative that says, I don't care about other people, it's all about me. Either way, right. You can have these self-defining narratives that are revealing these filters of consciousness that when we talk about energy itself, you'll see how when you understand them, it's mind-boggling how if you overlay this proposal, mind is an emergent property of energy.
Yep.
Over this study I did where I had this wheel of awareness practice, and I don't think I had finished the study at the time we did our prior interview.
You didn't.
So now I have this 10,000 person study. I did this very simple practice called the wheel of awareness. I gave people microphones, or they wrote me notes about what the experience was like, looked at them across the whole globe, and then found very similar patterns of experience, and then tried to map those first-person subjective reports onto what physicists describe energy is, so that if you say the proposal is, okay, mind is an emergent property of energy flow. Well, what is energy? And we'll get into that. And then suddenly this whole new way of viewing where consciousness, cognition, and community all are overlapping aspects of one emergent flow.
Okay. And 10,000 people in the study.
Yeah.
Right? And the wheel of the awareness was the common
ground.
The common ground, right? Did you see, and you said community, because I was going to ask as you were saying that, if this was a global study, did culture affect this at all?
That's a great question, and we always want to look for universals. And
yep.
I've done this in Asia, I've done this in Africa, I've done this in Europe, I've done this in the United States, I've done this in Canada. It doesn't matter a person's background, even if they've never meditated before, their religion, gender, age, educational background, profession, doesn't matter. That's what was so fascinating about it.
Interesting.
That people would have this pattern that we can talk about in a moment, that I just felt so grateful to actually be hearing this. And when my students would come with me, they'd go, no one is going to believe that in this workshop where we did it, and I'm recording the results, that workshop and that workshop, identical things were said. And I said, yeah, but I'm recording it, so they can just listen to the results.
Wow. It's amazing. That's interesting. And I mean, the reason I ask is because I have some, maybe there's some data to support it. I haven't really looked into it, but that, the modern Western person living in a Western urban environment and engaged with social media the way that they are and so on and so forth is quickly mutating into something different than, say, somebody in rural Africa. And I'm just wondering if there is data to support that.
Well, that is the fascinating thing. The thing I guess that struck me was I mean, when we get into the details, I mean, you'll see how I guess it shouldn't be so surprising if, in fact, the fundamental nature of energy is the same across species and across cultures and across individuals. And if the mind truly is emerging from energy, then you would ask the question, well, what does energy flow really mean? What would that feel like? What would the subjective experience feel like of that energy flow? And that's what we can get into if you want.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah.
Please, tell me more.
Well, the simple practice, that we have on our website and that I would do in these workshops is the following just reasoning. This will just take like a minute to explain it. But in my field, interpersonal neurobiology, we combine all the fields of science together into one framework to look at what the mind is and what mental health is. And so two what are called consilient findings. Consilience is when you see different disciplines finding their own fundamental principles and then seeing that they kind of align. That's consilience. E.O. Wilson writes about that. So one idea is that integration, which is defined as different parts becoming linked, that's integration, differentiation and linkage, is the basis of health. And there's a ton of science behind that consilient proposal. The second consilient proposal is that awareness or consciousness is needed for change. So if someone's going to change in whatever method, interventions that might be done this way or that way, or school, or transformative experiences, or being raised as a kid, awareness is needed for change. That's the finding. So what I said was, if consciousness is needed for change and integration is the basis of health, what would happen if you integrated consciousness? So to do that, through this wall, that table you saw in that room has a center glass area and an outer wooden rim. And I would take my patients and I would say to them, get them off the chair or couch, I'd say, hey, let's integrate consciousness. And they go, what are you talking about? I go, well, integration is health, consciousness needed for change, let's try this out. And they go, well, okay, what are you talking about? I said, well, if you're going to integrate anything, you want to differentiate its components and then link them. So it's more like a fruit salad, not a smoothie. You're not blending it together.
Okay.
You're maintaining the differentiated parts, but
you can put them together but still pick them apart.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So I said, look at this table.
Yeah.
Consciousness can be simply defined as having the knowing and the known. And let's put the knowing visually in this metaphor of a table. The glass center, let's call that the knowing, being aware.
Yep.
And let's say the known, like what you hear or see or something like that, on the rim. And no one wanted to call it the table of awareness, so we call it the wheel of awareness. But it came from that table right through that wall there.
Oh, wow.
And so we said, okay, let's try this out. So there's something holding up the table, it looks like a spoke. So we said, okay, that's a spoke of a wheel kind of thing. So it's a metaphor, but let's move the spoke systematically in the mind's eye around 4 different segments of the rim. The first segment has the energy patterns from outside the body, like hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touch.
The senses, okay.
Senses, 5 senses. Yeah. Then you take a deep breath, you move the spoke over to the next segment. That's the interior energy flow of the body. So muscles, bones, genitals, internal organs like intestines, respiratory system, heart. Take a deep breath, move the spoke over again. Then you explore mental activities like emotions, thoughts, images, memories, hopes, dreams, longings, desires, beliefs.
Okay.
All that, just call that mental activities.
Yep.
And just to keep this going, the first 5 senses, first segment. Second segment is what's called the 6th sense, the interior signals of the body, called interoception.
Yep.
And so I called that the 7th sense, mental activities. Take a deep breath, move the spoke over now to the 4th and final segment, which is our sense of relationships to other people or to the planet. A relational sense. I call it the 8th sense. It's one of the most underdeveloped senses we have. Anyway, as we did that, people started reducing anxiety, reducing mild to moderate depression. I had some people facing serious life-threatening illnesses. Their anxiety about dying changed. And then for fun, I don't know why we did this, but I had them bend the spoke around.
Okay.
And aim it right into the hub. And later on in workshops, people say, I don't like to bend it, I want to just retract it. So, okay, they retract it. I don't want to retract it, I want to leave it in the hub. Okay, fine. Or I don't want to have any spoke, I want to have no spoke, just I want to be in the hub. Fine. So, however the visual image works, the idea is the same. Pure awareness.
Yes.
Or some people would call it awareness of awareness, called meta-awareness.
Right.
Okay, so then people in my office, or when I did this in workshops, would describe the following thing in this hub and hub moment. They would say time disappeared. They had a feeling of awe, gratitude, joy, love. They felt God. They felt connected to everything. They felt this expansive feeling of somehow being completely full, but yet at the same time empty. There was this feeling of eternity. There was this sense of the infinite. And people with them, when they would do the practice on a regular basis, could learn to return to this hub, not so much to stay in the hub all the time, but to learn to live from the hub, is the way they would describe it. So that suffusing daily experience would be this timeless quality of being interconnected with things, where people lived life more like it was this unfolding verb rather than these separate noun-like entities. You became more like an unfolding verb-like interconnected process.
Are you familiar with Satchit Ananda, the Hindu? It's a Vaishnava Hindu. I guess it's a definition of the soul, not a definition, a philosophical perspective of the souls and our incarnation's true nature, Sat Chit Ananda, that the soul and our existence of the soul in human form is full of knowledge, eternal, and full of bliss. And that is the true nature of it. And so it's kind of like, the Vedic thing, which is our, getting back, that's what you see in Ram Dass retreats, getting back to our true nature, which is that.
That's so interesting. You know, I have no background in training in that kind of stuff, but what has been so fascinating is when people do, they bring up stuff like this from every religion you can imagine. And what's so interesting to me about it is I wasn't familiar with that, and yet in a 25-minute meditation, like one time a Microsoft engineer who just retired, I was doing this with Jack Cornfield in Seattle, he did it when he bent the spoke around. He got into that spaciousness, and he's like crying when he's sharing this with everybody. He realizes he is the butterfly, he is the water, he is the bird, and he's like crying, and he's never had this experience before in his life.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, when you were describing it, it really brought that up. From just a practical thing, there was one thing I was a little confused on, is the actual practice of bending the spoke.
It's a visual image. It's just the idea of it.
Oh, it's the idea of it.
Oh,
okay,
yeah. You don't have to do anything with the table out there.
No, but
the table would fall down.
No,
but it's
you're just visualizing it.
It's a metaphor.
Oh, with your eyes closed or open?
Either way.
Okay.
Whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's just the idea of, okay, you're now focusing attention by moving the spoke around, which is cool.
Yeah.
Awareness in the hub is different from the direction of energy flow with the spoke.
Yeah.
So amazingly, even kids who just do the wheel as a drawing, no meditation or anything like that, get the benefit of actually visualizing the mind as having this capacity to distinguish hub from rim, and then being empowered to move the spoke around wherever they need on the rim. So I said to myself, this is like wild. Why are these reports so similar across the planet? And so I was actually at a meeting with 150 physicists as a young faculty member there. And so I used that week that I was living with them in this old converted monastery to ask them, what is energy? Because they're like the world's scientific experts in energy, right? And I had written, like a decade or two at that point earlier, that the mind might be an emergent property of energy. So then here I was with them. So I said, what is energy? So the first thing they said is, there is no such thing as energy. Just like there's no such thing as a mammal, right? Because mammal is just a class of something. There's a dog, a cat, and us.
Right.
So it's mammal is just a word for a classification. So I said, okay, fine. No such thing as energy, no such thing as mammal. What is the class of thing in the world called energy?
Right.
They go, oh, well, it comes in electrical energy and chemical energy,
so there's no
sound
consensus.
energy. And I go, okay, fine. But what do they all show? Why are you using the word energy for all those things?
Right.
And they said, that's easy. I go, oh, great, tell me. And they go, all forms of energy are the movement from possibility to actuality.
Okay.
The movement from possibility to actuality. And I thought about it and I go, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm sitting on that one for a second. Yeah, that's
huge.
That's huge.
Huge.
Right.
So it was like one of those moments in life when you go, I'm not going to be the same after this.
Right.
So
Right. That is huge.
I sat down with the results of the emerging study of the Wheel of Awareness. And I took a graph out for some graduate students who were there because they were asking me about it. And if you make a graph, so for anyone listening, this is how you would do it. The bottom of the graph, put across from left to right what's called the x-axis in a diagram. That'll be called time or change. Then up and down from the corner where it hits that x-axis upward, it's called the y-axis, this vertical axis. Let's just call that probability. And just to keep it simple, we're not going to do the third dimension, which is diversity of things, but it can become a three-dimensional graph that you would see in the book Aware. And when you look at this probability graph, let's say, Zach, right now, I have a word I'm thinking of. And let's say, just as an example, there's 1 million words that you and I share, and I'm thinking of one. What's your chance of knowing the word I'm about to say?
Not
1 out of 1 million.
1 out of 1 million, okay.
So it would be really low on this graph of probability.
Right.
It's called near zero.
Okay.
1 in 1 million, pretty close to zero, right?
Yes, right.
But it's not quite zero, so the physicists say you've got to say 1 out of 1 million. So at the bottom of this graph, the lowest point would be where all possible things are. In this case, we're using examples of language, and we're making a statement there's 1 million words. Okay, fine. Now I say ocean.
Yep.
And then on your graph, you would put a point at 100%. Because you know I said ocean, I just said it.
Right.
But now let's say I'm only going to say one of the 5 oceans, Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, etc. Now there's a very elevated...
20% chance.
Exactly.
Yes, okay.
Perfect.
Right.
So there's a 20%, what we're going to call a plateau,
Okay.
and only 5 things can arise out of that plateau. So it's like a filter of consciousness, you'll see in a moment, that filters all the possibilities into just 5. And then when they arise, Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, etc., they come up to the 100% mark.
Okay.
So I look at this graph, I look at the results of the Wheel of Awareness workshops and when people report their experience. And in physics, that lowest point, the near zero, has a name. It's called the sea of potential in a poetic way, but the physicists call it the quantum vacuum.
Yeah, okay.
It is the formless source of all
of
form.
all things, right? Okay.
So it is empty of form, so it's formless, but it's full of potential form. So it's full of possibility and empty of actuality. So then I go back to the study on the wheel. So many people say, I don't know what I mean by this, but it's empty but full. Now, when you study this quantum vacuum, in the graph, it's a 3-dimensional shape of a plane, so we call it the plane of possibility. When you study the dimensions of the plane of possibility, the aspects of it, in this quantum state, okay, now reality, physicists tell us, has 2 established realms. One is called the quantum realm, the other is called the classical realm. Classical realm is where you have what are called macro states, and Isaac Newton studied these and looking at how planets moved around. We're in big bodies.
Right. The quantum realm and the
macro state. The words that are used are classical Newtonian realm, which is the macro state world, like large bodies, like the ones we're in, or the quantum realm, which is the micro state realm.
You cannot see.
Well, electrons, photons, little things,
Yeah.
right? So these units of energy, quanta, are basically probability fields. Now, what this tells us, basically, about these realms is that in the Newtonian classical realm, this macro state world of large bodies,
right,
things appear like nouns, like entities that are separated from each other. But when you drop into the quantum realm, then there's no longer nouns, it's verbs, and reality are events that are deeply interconnected.
And within this quantum vacuum, all of these different, aspects of probability, the manifestations of actuality are all in there somewhere.
Well, not the manifestations, no.
Okay.
The potentials.
The potentials.
Right.
Okay.
So there's no energy actually in the quantum vacuum. It's actually potential energy.
It's potential energy waiting to take
waiting
form.
to come up, if you just picture on the graph, waiting to come up to either a plateau where it's like an energy form that says only 5 oceans is what I'm going to say, or an actual Indian Ocean, you say. So basically, what I think is going on is that a thought is when energy is actualized into that point at the top. Thinking is a sub-peak value. An emotion is a peak. Just beneath the peak, emoting. A memory, a peak. Just beneath the peak, remembering. A state of mind or intention or mood would be a plateau from which these sub-peak and peak values arise. So your certain state of mind, like thinking you're a loser or thinking you don't care about other people, that's where these narratives would be.
Okay.
Now here's the amazing thing, and this is the proposal, and this whole thing could be wrong, it could be partially right, or it could be right. Here's what I think is going on. I think awareness, the knowing of consciousness, arises when the probability position of energy has moved down into the plane of possibility.
Okay. I feel that. So I wanted to do a little exercise here for a second, talking about that and potential turning into actuality.
Yeah.
I guess from an energetic standpoint, but from a real world standpoint, and say, you hear so much talk about, like, it's kind of become a self-help cliche, but about manifesting your ideas or your reality or your dreams or something like that to create, the human condition that is the most optimal condition for your life, to create your dharma. So if you have an idea, floating throughout your head, and it's just kind of muddled, it's kind of stuck, you can't really, whatever it is, maybe it becomes a screenplay, maybe it becomes a painting, maybe it's a song, maybe it's something you're cooking for dinner, whatever it is, maybe it's a company, a business, or like you're writing, theses and very, articulating complex ideas, whatever it is, you've got these thoughts swirling and swirling and swirling, but the potential, it's in there energetically, but for whatever reason, you can't get it out. You're stuck on it. It's for whatever reason. But then you have a breakthrough, however that breakthrough, whatever it is for each individual person, it becomes actuality. Oh my God, I birthed the song or something. So, does that feel right to you?
Completely. I have a son who's a musician.
Right.
Alex Siegel, and he and I talk about this. It's exactly, as a writer, it's exactly what he describes. And here's a way of thinking about it in general with other people, in addition to him, that I've talked to about this. If you picture this graph where you have peaks where things have become actualized, like a writer writes a poem and chooses the certain words.
Yep.
Or the mood that's created, which would be more like a plateau. So when you drop into the plane, I think that's where presence comes from. Not just awareness, but that's presence.
Okay.
So if you're an artist like my son or others, and you don't know what to do, you do an exercise. In this case, it's the wheel, but there are lots of other ways you could probably do it too.
Sure.
So you drop into the presence that arises from the plane, and then you don't make the poem happen, you don't make the song happen, you let the conditions be created where the song manifests itself through you. And I think what's going on there, coming back to our earlier discussion, is when you drop into the plane of possibility, you're enabling integration to naturally arise. So a song, a poem, a book, a creative approach to accompany whatever it is that we need on this planet to bring more love and kindness into the world. Three things seem to arise: awareness, interconnectedness, and love seem to each be co-emergent out of the plane of possibility. And so when you can give yourself a way to drop out of these plateaus that are restricting you and drop into the plane, what my colleagues and students and patients even have found, that this incredibly simple wheel of awareness image allows them to realize when you get out of the rim, which means getting out of these peaks and restrictive plateaus, and drop yourself into the hub, which means dropping yourself into the plane of possibility, you allow things to start arising that you're not controlling, you're not making them happen. And so in a way, you're of service to the natural process of integration, which, what is it? It's kindness, it's compassion, it's being of service to others, it's being creative, it's being incredibly innovative. And in a strange way, you're not making the poem has found itself through you.
Yes, and every great songwriter will say, their best songs, right, it felt like they were being channeled.
Yeah, and I think this is why.
Right, okay.
I think our bodies, in a beautiful way, can be vehicles through which energy manifests itself into integrative states that have an infinite variety of ways they can present themselves. And sadly, what happens is various things we go through in life can construct plateaus that restrict us.
And it gets you stuck in that rim.
And you're stuck on the rim, exactly.
Yes, you're stuck on the rim.
Exactly.
And I mean, I hear you visually say it, like when we talk about the visual metaphor, and as we're doing the podcast, I'm visualizing it and I see it, and it sounds, well, first it feels very intuitive. So that's when I hear a new technique or method, that's what I look for first. Oh, this feels very intuitive. I resonate with this. And I maintain that, but then I'm also, fuck, man, getting stuck on the rim. It's like, it happens all the time.
Well, yeah, exactly. I'll give you an example. We did this in Esalen with a bunch of scientists. I had 150 participants, but I was teaching with a bunch of scientists. Dacher Keltner was one of them from Berkeley. So Dacher says, after we do the wheel, and he says, Dan, I've got to give these people the mystical experiences scale that people give with hallucinogens, with psychedelics.
Yes.
So I said, well, I don't know what that scale is, but whatever you want to do is fine with me, Dacher. So he gives the scale to 150 people.
Yeah.
We get the reports, right? People raising their hands in response. He got, in that setting, reports equivalent to what you get with psychedelic use, which is what people would say. I think I'm stoned. This 25-minute thing. I think the overlap is that this is a very brief meditative technique, 25 minutes.
Yes.
That drops you out of the rim and into the plane, into the hub. Now what that means that's the metaphor.
Yes.
The mechanism is what you've constructed as your believed self in this shared consensus we have about reality.
Yes.
It's a construct.
Yeah.
Those are plateaus that can imprison us with only certain peaks that arise. And then what you do with a practice like the wheel is you get beneath those imprisoning plateaus and their incessant peaks that reinforce themselves with consensual, cultural beliefs about who we are.
Right.
And you drop into the place of the infinite. You feel for some God. Now, look at this. God, which is so interesting for me as a scientist.
Yes.
What is the plane of possibility? It's the generator of diversity, the G-O-D.
So you go beyond the programming, your programming, into
the infinite.
Into the infinite.
Presence.
About presence. Oh, good. So what I wanted to get, before you go on that, and we said this before we rolled tape earlier, defining presence to me, because I think that is it's somewhat of an abstract concept to, I mean, we say to increase presence, the practice of presence, the power of presence. You know, what does it mean?
Well, in where you and I are at in our discussion, for me, presence, the simple way of trying to articulate what presence is, you could simply call it receptive awareness. And from our view of the metaphor of the wheel of awareness and the drawing of this three-dimensional graph of having the plane of possibility be equivalent to the hub, presence is when you learn to live from the plane of possibility.
Okay.
So I can have thoughts arise or particular judgments and attitudes, intentions, beliefs that are plateaus.
Yes.
But I've learned to drop beneath them on this graph, right? And to feel the spaciousness where I don't have thoughts, I don't have judgments, I don't have beliefs, I have receptivity. Now, what's absolutely fascinating about seeing presence as basically living from the plane of possibility is, number one, for whatever reason, it seems that that's where awareness comes from. Number two, there's this overlap of awareness with a sense of interconnectedness and love. And I think this generator of diversity, this plane of possibility, gives you a feeling of why that would be the case.
Yes, it does.
And then the third of many, many implications is that when people live from presence, they're dropping their mind, their experience, into not just a pause between impulse and action, not just awareness, which is awesome, but it's actually the location, a mathematical space where all other options rest. And so the reason creativity emerges from presence is that you've placed your energy probability position into the location of other options. And so now you're resting there. And when you see that the quantum state is also what's called arrow-free. The arrow of time means a directionality of change. This directionality of change, when we're aware of it, like cracking an egg open, after you crack it, after you and I crack an egg open, we can't uncrack it. Right. That's called the arrow of time. So there's a lot of views that there's no such thing as time that flows, but there is that change that in the macro state realm of reality unfolds. But in the quantum realm, there is no arrow of time. And so part of presence is timelessness. It's arrow-free. And I think this...
It's the infinite.
It's the infinite,
yeah.
And you drop into that. And so when you encounter someone who has presence, you go, whoa, because you're resonating now with, and this is now maybe a fifth implication. If the fourth is it's timeless, the fifth implication is it's where we really meet each other. Because, Zach, your, in quotes, plane of possibility, and mine, infinite is infinite. That's where we all find each other.
Right. And you said earlier, we don't have beliefs, we have what? You said something. We don't have beliefs, we have...
Well, these filters of consciousness?
Yeah, you said something, and it supported that idea of like, oh my God, we can all coexist on the plane of presence.
Oh, right, together. Exactly.
Yeah, because our beliefs... and this gets into the love and the compassion thing and cooperation, community, all of these great things that can arise from that is like, we have this tendency to turn our beliefs into like these cultural like mandates or something, as you see with religion or something, and it causes wars, or you see in politics now especially, you know what I mean? And as far as I can make out, these are tools of separation. Beliefs lead to tools of separation, and they're the very opposite of presence in a way, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So that's beautiful because when you have your energy probability position, and that we can talk like this, drop into the plane of possibility, and the body that you were born into encounters a body that you were not born into. You look at that person from presence, you invite them to resonate with presence, and you realize you're the same entity. It's kind of like the Pando Populous forest in Utah, where there's 47,000 apparently different quaking aspen trees, but you just go 6 inches beneath the surface and you see the common root ball of this living organism that's one of the largest, oldest organisms on Earth. And then when you do the DNA test of the different trunks, it's the same tree. So we may have different bodies that are these actualizations for about 100 years you get to live in these macro states, but we come from the GOD, the generator of diversity. From a science point of view, the mind is not the same as the body, but it's flowing through the body. And so when, for me personally, I can say, when this view emerged about 10 years ago now, it just changed everything, even my own relationship with death. And the idea that you could drop into this presence, start feeling it, because I do the wheel every morning, and so you're always exploring the hub. The hub is the plane. So you get very familiar with accessing. It's kind of like swimming.
Yes.
When you're swimming in the ocean, like when you and I were in Hawaii together recently, right?
Yes.
So when I'm swimming out there in the bay, sometimes when I'm doing the breaststroke, let's say, I'm underwater, and then I come up for air. Well, we don't freak out and go, oh my God, there's an air realm and a water realm. How can that be? That's weird. But there is a macro state Newtonian classical realm that things look like nouns that are separated, and you drop underneath the water and you're in the quantum realm where things are verb-like, deeply interconnected. So what's interesting is you've got to swim above air, below water, above air, above the water and in the air, water, air, water, and you don't freak out. The same thing is when you start doing the wheel of awareness practice regularly, you have this opportunity to live from the plane of possibility, to lead from there, to learn from there, to love from there.
And to lead from there.
Yeah.
I think for me that's the key phrase, is that you can default to that state of consciousness.
Absolutely. Right. Yes. And it's not that you have to hang out only in the plane of possibility. And what I say to workshop participants is, look, you did the wheel, you love being in the hub, you love the feeling of the plane. That's fantastic and beautiful. And that's beautiful, and people feel like they're transformed. I love that. But I said, when you leave this workshop and get in your car, you need the plateau of skill driving of how to drive a car. Sure. You need to assert yourself to press on the accelerator, press on the brakes, because if you don't use those plateaus and peaks, that part of the rim, and you only hang out in the hub, in the plane of possibility, you will become one with everything at the intersection, even though it's a red light.
Yes. So those 4 different, elemental groups that you talked about earlier that make up, the human experience.
Yeah.
Very much like the fruit salad. You can't blend it all together.
No.
You need to be able to, you have to.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's where integration helps us. So when people say, oh, I've been doing the wheel, I really just want to live in the hub, I go, I really appreciate the feeling. I do. But listen, you were born into a body. The body needs you to be on the rim sometimes, to eat, to breathe, to press on the brakes at a red light.
Yes. And
so we integrate it, right? You don't blend it like you're saying. It's not a smoothie. And so then what's really interesting about that, Mirabai Bush's book with Ram Dass about, what is that, walking our way home? What is it called?
Walking each other home.
Walking each other home, yeah. For me, it's like we find each other in life in these bodies. But the plane of possibility is also there. And if we're lucky enough to cultivate that and find one another in these body lifetimes we have,
sure,
then we are walking each other home, because that plane of possibility is home. It's where we were before these bodies were conceived. It's where we go after these bodies will be gone. And what I try to do to remind myself that, and to work with my colleagues in this, is you're not just a me, where you're in a separate body, and you don't have to give up that differentiation thing and say, oh, we're just going to be a we. But you're both. You're a me and a we, and so I use the term we. You're e. And what's been so fun and liberating about we is that people go, that's right. I have, aspects, peaks and plateaus I need to work with. And I have the plane. I have a me and I have a we. So I can be both. I don't have to make a decision.
Yes.
And in the we experience, there's this liberation from dichotomization, because you can live an integrated life living from the plane of possibility.
I love that. And, I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you this, but there are many, many parallels to the psychedelic experience here with the wheel of awareness practice.
Tell me about it, because that's not an area that's my experience.
Well, in the best sense, the psychedelic experience, when experienced in an ideal situation, and you get a beneficial trip or journey, as it were, the experience is one to where you are able to inhabit true witness consciousness, where you can step outside of your ego, out of the condition of being Zach all the time, and step outside and look at yourself and be like, wow, okay, here are all these parts of my identity that I cling on to that make me, and you can put them all out there on the cosmic mirror and go, well, there's that one, and that's emotions and and anger and all my maybe unsavory emotions. How is that serving me? And maybe you can look to drop it. You look at
so that's like the plane looking up at all the plateaus and peaks.
Yes.
And it's from kind the hub looking at the rim.
Yes, exactly. It's like the hug beautiful. Looking at the rim. Mm-hmm. And then you see, after all of this analysis and kind of dropping what is serving, what's not serving you, you can focus on this presence. And you can see the presence. And that is truly who you are, as our friend Ramdas says, exactly. Souls, not roles. Who we truly are, not who we think we are. This paradigm of who we think we are, it's such a driving and strong thing, and it's really, really hard to break. And I'm just seeing a lot of parallels in the psychedelic experience. But then, like you said, with some of your people in the workshop, that they want to just hang out in the middle all the time.
Yeah, in the hub.
Yeah, in the hub all the time. And like people are just like, fuck, man, you got to come down. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. You got to come down.
Right. Well, see, this is what's so fun about the wheel.
Yeah.
Is that you, in any given moment, you can tap into the hub and then tap into the rim. Tap in the hub, rim, back and forth. You can go into the plane and go into the plateaus and peaks. And that's the integrated life. And you don't need a pill to do it. You don't even need to be in the meditation. You've been practicing the meditation.
Yes.
So I do it every day. And then you've been doing that. It's so interesting because, when I first visited Ramdas years ago, someone made it possible for us to have dinner together, and then we were out in that Monday swim, And so I was telling him about this plane of possibility thing, and he started splashing the water. He goes, that's it. And he was so excited about it. And what's been so fascinating about it is it matches, like you're saying, psychedelic experience. It matches people who are in the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition, the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition. Just I'm an everyday meditator. This was an experience I had a month ago on a retreat, And so far, what's been so interesting about, I call it the 3P graph, the peaks, plateaus, and plane, is it matches what everyone has presented to me. Now, maybe there are a ton of people there who just don't bother calling me or talking to me because it doesn't match. But so far, it's been so interesting as a consilient framework that ties together the whole shebang. And what's so fun about it is even, when my dad was dying, and I say this in the Aware book, he was a mechanical engineer, real Newtonian classical physics guy, didn't want to hear about spirituality or anything like that. But when I talked to him about the idea that because he was worried about where he was going, that he might be going to exactly where he was before he was conceived, and that would have been this vast plane of all possible combinations of sperm and egg, and that he'll return to this place. He became very peaceful. And beautiful. For me too, when I think that, you get about 100 years to live in these bodies, you get a name and a social security number and all that stuff, and the key is to try to help each other get access to this plane of possibility. That's where we find each other, and that's where integration arises. So you kind of get a purpose-driven life, cultivate more integration, a methodology. For me, it's the wheel of awareness, and then this fun way, like you're swimming through life, of dropping into this quantum state where you experience the infinite, this generator of diversity, this incredible thing where life is like unfolding verbs that are deeply interconnected, and love is all around there. And this is what I do every day in my meditation, and then it stays in various ways throughout the day. And of course, there are irritating phone calls or people honking at me, but you find a way to access that hub, that plane of possibility. And so I'm just so grateful to talk to you about this, because and if it resonates with you, that's just so energizing. You know?
It does, and I think it will with my listeners. And I think I'm not sure if I was at the dinner, but I think I was at that swim that you're talking about. I think might have even been at the dinner. But okay, your book's out now. People can go to the website and learn about the practice, right? It's all up there.
It's all there. We have a whole suite of things that people want to do, like. We have like a 20-minute talk, a 1-hour talk. There's a 10-hour video that a documentarian made of a workshop, and then the coolest thing, not the coolest thing, but a cool thing that happened was someone who lived near Sir Isaac Newton's house.
Oh, wow.
Had me do the wheel of awareness practice around the apple tree.
Oh, wow.
Where Newton figured out Newtonian physics. Of course, it was Newton.
Jeez.
And so you drop into this quantum state underneath the bedroom where Sir Isaac Newton was born, and we pay homage to Sir Isaac and say, look, that's the world you knew, and here's another world we invite you to come join us in.
Beautiful. Dan, thank you.
Zach, a pleasure.
Thanks.